You're listening to the Church Growth Podcast, helping church leaders like you quickly reach more people far from God. Coming to you from the High Five state of Michigan, here's your host of the Church Growth Podcast, best-selling author and founding pastor of Life Church Michigan, Jonathan Herron.
Well, hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in. Episode 78. Oh, my goodness. I feel so old. I'm almost a septuagenarian. Church Growth Podcast. Special guest today is our friend Lauren Bercarich, Communications Director Extraordinaire at Liquid Church in New Jersey. Welcome to the program, Lauren.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Lauren is the co-host of a brand new podcast that you need to start subscribing to called Church Changer. And co-host is Tim Lucas, who was a previous guest. Big hair preacher guy. Awesome guy.
That's right.
But Lauren, tell us about yourself before we dive into, how do we do ministry now that everything's changed?
Sure, I would love to.
Yeah.
So let me just dive in a little bit. I like to frame things up personally first, because I feel like that's the first thing that defines me is I'm a wife and a mom to a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I've got a third one on the way. So I feel like that sets the stage. My background is in journalism and public relations, and that's a field I was working in when my campus pastor at Liquid Church in New Jersey said, "Hey, what do you think about joining our team?" That was about 7 years ago. And I joined as the communications director. And literally just within the last few months, as we've decided, hey, we just have to push into hybrid church and meta church in a whole new way, I'm actually wearing a new hat and transitioning into the role of digital director at our church. And so that's super exciting because we're trying to build out this new team within our organization. And just for a little bit of context, Liquid, we're in New Jersey. I'm a New Jersey girl, born and bred. And pre-pandemic, we had more than 5,000 people attending our locations physically. Now we're seeing those same numbers split between our physical locations and our digital campus.
Yeah, it is so wild. Anytime someone asks, how many people come to your church? I'm like, I don't even know anymore. There's a pre-pandemic and then now this new reality. So take us back to when the world shut down. You were still on staff at that time, right? At Liquid Church?
Yep. I've been on staff here since 2015. So
what was the experience like when you suddenly realized, oh, we can't have weekly worship in person? Like, were people running around with their heads chopped off like chickens, or what was that experience like?
So I think like a lot of people, when we met in March of 2020 as a staff, we thought, oh, we're going to have to shut down for a couple of weeks and then we'll be back. And as some of you may recall, on the East Coast here in New York and New Jersey, we were kind of at the forefront. We were experiencing those high COVID rates and the lockdowns earlier than much of the country. And so we brought all our staff together. We had that plan for moving everything online. Luckily, we already had a church online infrastructure and broadcast, so we didn't have to create that. But when we soon realized this was actually more going to be a long haul for us as a church, we did start to revamp that. And that looked like, well, do we need to be on new platforms, right? We should be on Facebook. We should be on YouTube. What should our service times look like? Should we be broadcasting Saturdays and Sundays? Live services versus on-demand services. So our scramble was more around fixing what our church online infrastructure looked like, but we didn't have to build it from scratch, which was a blessing, because I know that was really tough for a lot of people to figure out. And then growing our digital ministry over the course of the next year plus, because our physical campuses were closed for quite some time.
Wow. And I'm really curious, with all of the creativity at Liquid Church and, the innovations that you all are always going through, what did you learn from the last 2 years that maybe you would apply now for church leaders?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. The learning seemed endless, right? Um, so something that I think applies to everybody is that you really have to get your digital properties in order, in good shape. In other words, your website needs to be top notch. Your YouTube channel needs to be optimized. And so, for instance, in 2020, we actually did an entire website overhaul, realizing that it wasn't serving people well enough. So, your website, it really is the front door of your organization and it's communicating who you are. It's either communicating something positive or something negative, right? So, if your website is out of date, if it's not mobile friendly, if it's not easy to navigate. For young people, you would be communicating like, oh, this isn't the place for me. I wouldn't actually want to attend there. So they might not take that next step, right? To actually watch an online service or attend a physical campus, or even a next step like, oh, I'll try out a small group or I'll read your blog. They might just opt out. So getting that website in order was super important for us. We already had a presence on YouTube, but it wasn't optimized, following the best practices for making your YouTube channel effective. And so we did a complete overhaul there as well. Everything from the graphics you see to how we're writing our titles and our descriptions of our videos to what we're uploading on YouTube. All of that, we went through a transition to make sure that that looked good. Social media channels, I think everybody has them, but are they actually done with intentionality? Or are you doing the best practices? So I think that one of the learnings was is we really had to put some extra effort into the housekeeping and the strategy behind those properties and then maintaining them too. And so I think that's something that applies to every church of every size, and that's going to continue.
If I'm a church leader that is broadcasting the Sunday morning worship experience on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, how do I know how many people are actually tuning in? Because, I can be scrolling through Facebook, a video will pop up and it'll start playing for 3 seconds. Then I keep scrolling. How do I know? How do I measure effectiveness? I guess is the question when you're doing
Yeah.
online.
That's a great question. I think over time, I've become less concerned with the number of viewers. I'm definitely not somebody who wants to use a multiplier like, oh, for every one view, it's one, we're going to count it as 1.7 and try to beef up the numbers because that's making it all about the numbers. And I think that that's missing some of the point. And you pointed to like effectiveness versus maybe the number of viewers, because some people might watch for, like you said, a Facebook scroll is 3 seconds versus somebody on YouTube, maybe who stuck around for 15 minutes. Those are very different people you're engaging with. But if you dig into some of the analytics, I love to see who is watching and how they're watching. So, for example, if you were looking at your analytics on YouTube, which are fantastic and super easy to access, you could see that maybe your audience is younger than those who are watching on Facebook, which I think would be intuitive, right? You could see, oh, okay, if I do some of the analytics, like say on the Church Online platform, which is what we use and connect to on our website too, what are the top 10 cities that people are watching from? Are people watching us, more so? Are they local? Are they more all spread across the country? How are they watching us? Are the majority of us watching on mobile devices, which is typically the trend right now, but you could actually see that percentage. You could see how people are sharing your messages. Like, oh, they're actually texting the link. They're using WhatsApp to get the word out about your message. So I feel like diving into those types of metrics paints a better picture of the who is watching and how is watching. But as for the sheer numbers, on YouTube, you can see that with your video views. That's pretty easy. And you can see an average watch time as well. So the average watch time for a YouTube video right now across the board, not just for churches, is 11 minutes or so. So if you're in that ballpark, you can feel really good about yourself. If you're saying, hey, the average watch time is 11 minutes, people are only sticking with us for 4, then that's telling you something, right, about the content that you're putting out, or the fact that your description and your title aren't matching what your actual video is. So people are clicking and then saying, oh, that's not actually what I wanted. So I think you can look at that with, the church online platform too, that gives you really accurate metrics. Facebook is where it gets a little bit more confusing. I tend to say, hey, I want people to at least be around for, longer than a minute before I'm going to count them as a view. And then I love to say, look at your on demand. Don't just count the YouTube views if you go live or you premiere on a Sunday. Don't just say that those are all my views. Track how people watched over the course of the week, because people's viewing habits are different. For us, the on demand viewing is a huge growth area. People have communicated to us that they like to watch when it's convenient for them. And so we see our views on YouTube, more than double over the course of that first week.
Wow. So if our listeners haven't had a chance to, see Liquid Church in action,
Yeah.
what does a typical online, service look like? Can you kind of paint that picture?
Yeah, so it's different across platforms. So on the church online platform and on Facebook, we're running a full service, which is more traditional. So you would open with some custom hosting. We do film it, it's custom for church online. We pre-produce that and pre-package that with one of our pastors on camera. Then you would see some worship that was pre-packaged as well, and that would transition you into the message from our speaker on that Sunday. And then you would close with some hosting as well. And what makes that a full service too is typically we have the live experience is what we start with. So you have the live chat, you have live prayer, and you can have that community feel during the service. And then those remain online afterwards. For YouTube, we take out everything and just leave the message itself.
Hmm.
And that's because YouTube is really a platform that's designed for search. And so we want our message to not just be applicable for that Sunday. We want it to be essentially applicable a year from now, 5 years from now. So if somebody goes to YouTube, which is the second largest search engine in the world, and they type in, how do I cope with anxiety? One of our previous messages might pop up. And what we think people want is not to have to filter through our hosting and our worship. They want to get the answer to their question. And so that by giving them just the message, we're answering their question right away more quickly. And so we found that to be an effective strategy for YouTube. And there's even more growth for us in that realm too, there's a lot of thought about cutting down your message length or repackaging, snippets from your message and repurposing it in strategic ways. So you're putting it out there in more than one way for people to find to get introduced to your content.
Holy cow. There's just so many opportunities. It's
It's
almost overwhelming.
it is overwhelming. It can be. It can be because obviously with everything that you pursue, right? Every new platform, every new strategy that you do, it takes some intentionality and some effort behind it. But what is amazing is if you start with your message that you've already put all this effort into and you focus on repackaging that in different ways, I think you already have a head start, because you can, say you do a shorter version, you do, we call them minute messages, right? So we'll cut down these minute sound bites from our lead pastor's message, and then we'll post them on social media. Well, now we're like, we should be putting them on YouTube as well as YouTube Shorts. So if you're putting that effort in already, well, what platforms do these play well on? And when I put them on that platform, what can I direct to? So you can have your minute message directing them to your full message if somebody wants to learn more or know more. So just trying to leave these like trail of breadcrumbs for people to continue to engage with you.
So some of our listeners are church planters, starting up a church from scratch. If you were starting a new church or a new ministry right now, what would you do or what would you not do when it comes to the digital realm?
So there are so many options, right? So you have to be strategic about what you pick. I think some of what I spoke about earlier in terms of your digital properties being up to snuff, would be super important for a church planter. So the website better be on point, right? You need to know what your message is, who you're communicating to, what you're communicating about yourself. You need to make sure it's mobile friendly, easy to navigate, optimized for search, all of those things. So I would definitely heavily invest in something like that. And I would make sure, right, you have to launch with some sort of social presence. I would argue that YouTube is the most important social channel. So I would pick where you're going to be. You don't have to be everywhere, by the way, because what I would warn against is having, you're on Twitch and TikTok and Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, but you're not doing any of them well because it's too much to manage. So I would say I warn against that. Pick a few platforms strategically and do them well. And be sure all of that is ready as you're moving toward launch, because that should actually be part of your communications and marketing strategy as you're moving toward your launch itself. And so that's where I think I would really, really focus. And I would say that although, if you're church planting, obviously the focus is so much on the physical location in the community that you're going to be serving. But I would consider what your church online strategy is going to be. And even if you're only launching on one platform, I would look to figure out what that is so you have that ready for your launch.
Wow. Now, you just recently helped launch a new podcast, Church Changer. Where can our listeners find the podcast and find you and Liquid at?
Yeah, so the Church Changer podcast is for all church leaders who just want to get really practical insights, and we just want to make your job easier, and we just want to give you tools, right? If we collaborate for Christ, then we all win. That's the goal really behind the podcast. So if you wanted to check us out online, it would just be churchchanger.com/podcast. We are on Instagram at Church Changers. And of course, on all the platforms, wherever you love to listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Google, you will find us there.
Awesome. And Liquid Church, you just type in, it's such a unique name. If you want to find out about Liquid, you just type it right in there.
Yep, we are in New Jersey, Liquid Church in New Jersey. You can't miss us, liquidchurch.com.
Wow. Well, Lauren, you've given us a lot to chew on. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. And we can't wait to learn more on the Church Changers podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Church Growth Podcast. Discover how our team can help you reach more people far from God by going to www.churchgrowth.network. You can also support this ministry by becoming a patron of the program at patreon.com/Jonathan Herron. That's patreon.com/Jonathan Herron. If today's program was helpful to you, help us reach more listeners by leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting platform. That's it for the Church Growth Podcast. We'll see you again next time.